Right now, President Trump's en route to Florida to attend the opening of Alligator Alcatraz.
Alligator Alcatraz.
Yeah.
It's the idea that if some illegal immigrants escape, they just get eaten by an alligator or a snake or something.
I guess that's the concept. This is not a nice business. I guess that's the concept. If snakes are fast, but alligators are, but we're going to teach them how to run away from an alligator, okay? If they escape prison, how to run away. Don't run in a straight line. Run like this. And you know what? Your chances go up about 1%, okay? Not a good thing.
Well, that's tough stuff. Joining us now is Border Czar Tom Homan. Tom, let me digress for a second. Yesterday on this program, Florida Congressman Carlos Jimenez said he wants you to focus on criminal migrants. He says South Florida needs the others, that is, non-violent criminal migrants, to stay and work. What do you say to that?
Well, if he's a member of Congress and fix the immigration system, I mean, that's his responsibility. ICE is enforcing laws enacted by Congress. They're not making this up. I mean, it's violation of federal law to enter this country illegally. It's illegal, to be here illegally is not okay. It's in violation of law, and ICE is simply out there arresting those who are in the country illegally. But let's get back to from day one, we've been concentrating on public safety threats and national security threats. That's what we're focusing on. But in the process of doing that, if we find somebody illegally in the United States that's not a criminal threat, well, they're going to be arrested and put in front of an immigration judge. That's what federal law requires. ICE isn't making this up. They're enforcing the law.
So you could go on a work raid, for example, an employment raid, and pick up people outside of Home Depot, take them away immediately, put them in the Alcatraz Everglades or whatever it's called, and that's okay? I think there might be a political backlash to that.
No, we are concentrating on public safety threats and national security threats, but then again, like I said, when we're out looking for the criminals, many times we find collaterals that, that are arrested because they're in sanctuary jurisdictions. Most of the collaterals are arrested in sanctuary jurisdictions, Stuart, because we're forced into the neighborhood. They don't give us access to a bad guy in the county jail. But I've said from day one, if you're in the country illegally, you're not off the table. I mean, it's not okay to enter this country illegally. It is a crime. It's not okay to knowingly hurt the illegal alien, because no one hires an illegal alien out of the goodness of their heart. They hire them because they work them harder, pay them less, and undercut their competition who has U.S. citizen employees, and it drives down labor rates. So we're focusing on the worst of the worst, but if you're in the country illegally, you're not off the table. We're going to force the laws without apology. We need to send a message to the whole world. It's not okay to enter this country illegally. It's not okay to ignore a judge's order. Most of the non-criminals we're looking for, we have a final order removal issued by a federal immigration judge. If those orders don't mean anything, we don't execute, then what the hell are we doing? Just shut down immigration court doesn't mean anything anymore. Take the Border Patrol off the border, because the message we're sending to the whole world is, go ahead and enter the country illegally. It's a crime, but don't worry about it. As long as you don't commit another crime after being here, you're off the table. Well, that's not the message we got to send the whole world, because you'll never fix the system doing it that way.
There is an investigation, we understand, into AOC and a worker for AOC who may be an illegal migrant. And it is reported that she may have been advising this migrant how to avoid ICE. If this is accurate and it turns out to be true and she is employing an illegal, what will you do?
Well, look, I know that information came to ICE a few days ago. I know they're drilling down on it. I don't know the specifics of the case. It depends on what they discover. And is the person actually illegal in the United States? Are they here in DACA? Are they here in some sort of temporary protected status? I don't want to get ahead of the investigation, because a lot of times this information is bad once they drill down into it. So I'm not going to comment on that until ICE has a chance to dig down and find out exactly what the issue is.
Okay, Tom, the White House is calling out CNN and that ICE spotting app that shows agents' locations on a map. Watch this, please.
There's been a 500% increase in violence against ICE agents, law enforcement officers across the country who are just simply trying to do their jobs and remove public safety threats from our communities. And that's something we as Americans, including journalists at CNN who live in many of these cities where illegal aliens are hiding, certainly it's unacceptable that a major network would promote such an app that is encouraging violence against law enforcement officers who are trying to keep our country safe.
But Tom Homan, the question is, does that app interfere with deportations? And if so, what do you do about it?
Absolutely it does, and it angers me. Look, I've been doing this since 1984, Stuart. I've been doing this longer than anybody around here. And I just can't believe we're in a place where, you know, a TV network like CNN is talking about this app and educating people on the existence of this app. ICE law enforcement officers, like I said earlier, they are concentrating on public safety threats and national security threats. This is a dangerous job. And this app is going to give the bad guy heads up that we're coming, which means more bad guys are going to escape arrest, which makes this country less safe, which is a public safety issue. And on top of that, it's only a matter of time for a bad guy, which is like someone who threw a Molotov cocktail at officers in L.A., who the assaults against ICE officers up over 500%. It's a matter of time before someone uses that app and ambushes ICE officers. This is something we cannot tolerate, we can't stand for, so we're calling them out. And I'm begging the Department of Justice to look into this and hold people accountable. This puts ICE officers at great risk. We're at a place in time where the Democrats are vilifying ICE as racist and Nazis. And on top of this app, I'm scared to death for the ICE officers who go out there every day, put their lives on the line. Something needs to be done. I'm begging DOJ to look in this, take some action.
Tom Homan, thank you very much for being on the show today. Hope we can come back again soon. Thank you, Tom.
Right, thank you.
Senate Republicans are also targeting Biden-era green energy subsidies. EPA Administrator Lee Zeldin joins me now. Mr. Administrator, are you killing for good those green energy tax incentives and subsidies?
Congress is doing its part right now with the One Big Beautiful Bill. They are asking themselves and having this conversation with the American public of whether or not the subsidy should just stay forever. And the answer that comes back from so many outside of Congress is that the answer should be no. That a lot of Americans care about the amount of money that's going towards these subsidies. And there's obviously a massive need for more baseload power. Unfortunately, many congressional Democrats, Democratic governors, talk about how wind, for example, which is an intermittent source, should be treated as a substitute for baseload power. In order to unleash energy dominance in this country, we need to tap into more baseload power, and congressional Republicans get that.
Mr. Administrator, I've asked you this several times. Is the Green New Deal essentially now dying and going towards death?
At the Trump EPA, the Green New Scam is done. It's dead, over. And that includes a whole lot of money that was wasted paying off activist NGOs. We have a zero tolerance policy for any waste and abuse. And on top of that, as far as the policies go, we inherited a big mess. What EPA is doing in 1 year is going to be more deregulation than entire federal governments across all agencies across entire presidencies. That's how much of a mess it was that we inherited. This is the Trump mandate to both protect the environment and grow the economy. We do not have to choose between the two.
President Trump praised your efforts on improving energy infrastructure to meet AI power demands. Watch this.
I had an idea. I said, when you build your plant, you're spending billions. You're going to become a utility, an electric utility. You're going to also build a utility. You're not going to take it from an old grid that's been here for 100 years. You're going to take it right from a new facility. And they actually looked at me, they said, you'd do that? Of course I would. It's a national emergency. I'm going to approve everything, and you'll have your approval in 2 weeks. And Lee Zeldin is doing an amazing job, the environmental commissioner. I said, Lee, you're going to approve this stuff fast. Make sure it's safe, make sure it's good, but you have to get it done fast.
Lee Zeldin, he likes you, so tell us, what are you doing to fast-track these major projects?
Well, one way, in many respects, with permits that have been before the agencies, just to get out of the way. It doesn't even require waiting for a new bill to come out of Congress. We found the EPA, in many ways, was gumming up the works intentionally to slow things down. President Trump wants to tear through the red tape. He talks to people and companies that want to invest billions of dollars in America, but they realize that by going forward with the project, there is uncertainty as to whether or not there will be an approval. It'll take too much time. It'll cost too much money. And President Trump wants to address all of that. So as it relates to expediting approvals, we want to do our part to cut through all of that red tape. On the policy front, as I pointed out, we're going through all sorts of different reconsiderations of rules that the Biden administration put into place, especially in 23 and 24, trying to suffocate entire industries, putting companies all over the map out of business in order to target baseload power. It is the opposite of what is the Trump mandate, the opposite of what the American public voted for last November. We want to fix everything.
Got it. Lee Zeldin, EPA Administrator. Thanks for joining us, sir. Come back soon. Thank you very much.
China's economy facing deflationary pressures. Beijing's manufacturing activity contracting for a third month despite additional stimulus efforts to stabilize the sector. The U.S. and China announcing a trade agreement over discussions done in Geneva. Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent telling Maria the deal makes it easier for American companies to acquire magnets and rare earth from Beijing. Maria sat down with the president on Sunday Morning Futures. He weighed in. Watch.
You've announced an agreement with the Chinese Communist Party, whereas China will export the rare earth minerals. Yeah. What does that mean in terms of this upcoming tariff structure?
We have to do something about the deficit because we have a big trade deficit with China. Biden let it get up to $1 trillion. Think of it, $1 trillion deficit with one country. He let them just take them over the coals. We're not going to do that. But we're doing a rare earth deal, but we're also doing, remember, we have all of the airplane parts. They can't fly their airplanes without us. So we had, some cards also. But it should have never gotten that way because we should have been doing they call it magnets. It's a rare earth, but they call it magnets, a specific type. And they're making those magnets for us right now, and things are well. And we have a deal with China. It's a good deal, I think, hopefully for everybody.
Joining me now, Gaystone Institute Senior Fellow Gordon Chang. Gordon, your reaction?
Well, first of all, it's good that the Chinese are going to start to export rare earths again. But we got to remember, they already promised to do this on May 12th. And apparently we have made additional concessions by lifting certain restrictions. Those restrictions haven't been named. I'm concerned that what we have done is we've taught the Chinese to violate their trade deals because if they violate them, we'll give them extra benefits. But, if we look at the bigger context, I think this is really good in the sense that we're stalling in a sense, that we are buying time for us to be also to start mining and processing rare earths and for our partners to do the same. So that will reduce China's leverage over the international community. So long term, I think that this is a good deal, although in the short term, I think that there are some pretty bad lessons we're teaching the Chinese.
Well, but another part of this China trade deal, and we don't have any details yet, but we've been told multiple times a framework is in place. Do you think that part of that is the TikTok story? Because when President Trump spoke with Maria, he said that he's got a buyer for TikTok, but President Xi Jinping has to agree, and we'll know in a couple of weeks. Do you think that that's folded in?
Well, probably when they had discussions with the Chinese in Geneva, a lot of topics came up that were not necessarily related to trade. And I'm sure TikTok was one of them because the Chinese here have been stalling us. And there hasn't really been a deal, and they haven't given their approval for it. And it's unlikely for them to do so without extreme pressure from the United States. So I'd like to see a TikTok deadline enforced. And I just believe that at some point we have got to put our foot down on this because the Chinese have really done their best to make sure that TikTok continues to operate under Chinese control. And that means China continuing to steal the data of Americans.
Yeah, and that's always been the concern. So what about these tensions between China and Taiwan? Things have actually gotten a little bit worse. Czech military intelligence revealed a plot by Beijing to have Taiwan's vice president followed and physically intimidated. The Taiwanese vice president writing on X, the CCP's unlawful activities will not intimidate me from voicing Taiwan's interest in the international community. New York Times even weighed in. They said how the U.S. strikes on Iran could impact China's aggression towards Taiwan. They say, quote, for China, Mr. Trump is a bit of a wild card in scenarios of how the United States would respond to Beijing's efforts to bring Taiwan to heel, including any attempt to take the island by force. The United States has long helped fend off China's military pressure and deter a possible attack. What's your take on this?
Well, President Trump striking the Iranian nuclear facilities, I think, was a demonstration of political will that the Chinese needed to see. They needed to see that the United States was willing to use force in extreme circumstances. And that's a lesson that I'm sure is taken on in Beijing. Got to remember that in the Middle East, President Trump's really effective diplomacy is chasing the Chinese out. In the last months, they've lost all sorts of friends there. Saudi Arabia, Qatar, Syria, they're losing Iran. And the concern, of course, is that they're going to ramp up pressure in East Asia as sort of a compensation for that. I'm not terribly worried about China starting hostilities with an invasion of the main island of Taiwan. I think Xi Jinping has lost control of the military. But this is a really bad story, Cheryl, because we've seen very provocative Chinese military activity along its periphery, from South Korea in the north to Australia in the south. If one of those incidents spirals out of control because of the intense infighting at the top of the Chinese political system, I don't think Beijing will be able to deal constructively with it, which means that a small incident could really spiral into region-wide war in East Asia.
All right. Well, before you go, I've got about a minute left here. Gordon, Beijing responded to NATO chief Mark Rutte's warning on China's massive military buildup and how China could use Russia to divide NATO's attention and then move into Taiwan. So Beijing says this is misinformation. Rutte is trying to vilify normal military development. Do you believe that?
I believe anything is possible right now. The situation we have resembles that before World War I, when things were just so complex that leaders couldn't manage the situation. They couldn't figure out who was on whose side. That's very much what we have today. So the fundamental dynamics of today really mirror what happened in 1914. So I'm concerned about anything. And the NATO General Secretary, he was absolutely right to warn about China's military buildup, because China, no one threatens China. So the reason is they're building up their military so they can threaten others and break apart their neighbors.
Well, and the Taiwan story comes up again. Gordon Chang, thank you for being here, Gordon.
Thank you, Cheryl.
So New York developers and landlords are scrambling to support a mayoral candidate who can counter self-described Democratic socialist Zohran Mamdani after his shocking primary win last week. So Mamdani's policies include a rent freeze on roughly 1 million rent-stabilized city apartments and building 200,000 publicly subsidized affordable housing units. Mamdani's website acknowledges the $100 billion price tag over the next decade, while proposing steeper taxes on millionaires and corporations to fund it. Well, wealthy New Yorkers are now looking at backup plans should Mamdani clinch the mayorship. Florida Governor Ron DeSantis, he weighed in. Here's what he wrote on X. Just when you thought Palm Beach real estate couldn't go any higher. Let's bring in the People's Corporation founder, chairman, and CEO Don Peebles, who luckily I've known you, sir, for almost 20 years, and you've always called New York and Florida your home. I can't tell you right now how many real estate people are reaching out to me in Florida saying, here we go again.
Well, it looks like de Blasio all over again. 2013, there was a big panic in what was going to happen in New York City when a progressive mayor was elected through the Democratic nominating process. And ultimately, de Blasio's 8 years moved New York City back, but it didn't end up in a catastrophic event. But there was a lot of shifting in terms of businesses and entrepreneurs down to South Florida, and then it was accelerated by the pandemic. I think this time around, we're going to see a bit of the same, but the ambitious plans of Mamdani, who has not yet clinched the Democratic nomination yet, and they're still counting votes. So, but ultimately, I think he will, and then there'll be a robust general election, unlike in 2013.
Well, we had former Lieutenant Governor Betsy McCoy with us yesterday, and she and many others in the city are forming these coalitions, whether it is with Jewish groups or it's with business people, corporate types, or in particular with real estate groups, because they know that you've already got these buildings in New York City that have value issues because of empty office space, for example. This kind of leads me into what we're seeing happen in the city, and we saw this in the pandemic. The Journal's got out this new piece, and it's called Turning New York Offices into Homes Finally Works. Now there's a rent freeze catch. The writer points out Zohran Mamdani's policies could hurt a promising source of new housing supply. So, Don, we've been doing these stories where we've seen them taking these large office buildings in Manhattan, and they are converting them into residential, into residential apartments. But they've got to have some subsidized housing, that rent stabilized housing. His policies, the Journal points out, would quash all of that. It would stop it all in its tracks.
Yeah, we've launched a fund actually to convert commercial office buildings into residential use and other alternative uses from Boston all the way down to Atlanta, and then of course on the West Coast. New York still is a challenge, whether it was Mamdani or whether it is Eric Adams or could have been Cuomo. The challenge is that the cost consequences to convert these buildings is still significant, but additional headwinds, from an administration that's going to increase taxes in the places that they can do it, which are going to be targeting commercial real estate taxes, I believe, are going to be one of the sources. That's going to slow things down. But what New York is short of is 500,000 affordable houses. And it's also short another 500,000 of workforce housing. Those two things are the biggest drivers of what is creating this housing crunch. And so it's short about 1 million units. And the only way that gets done is a much more comprehensive tax abatement and tax incentive and financial incentive effort by the state of New York. And the mayor of New York has very little to do with tax policy overall. That is dealt with at the state. And Governor Hochul has said any kind of tax increase right now is dead on arrival as far as she's concerned. So I think there's going to be a challenge in terms of raising taxes, which is good for businesses and high-income earners, but also it's going to hurt the ability to convert these buildings and build the housing that New York really needs.
Well, and I think that is becoming more and more clear to the residents of New York and people across the nation that are watching this play out, thinking, wow, the Democrats are really going the other direction with the progressive stance here, because a lot of the things that he's promising, he actually can't deliver. He legally cannot do half the things that he's promising. I mean, I heard somebody yesterday on local news call him Santa Claus. But I want you to listen to this. So, Maria sat down with President Trump on Sunday Morning Futures, and she brought up this issue about what's happening in the city. I want you to watch his answer to her.
What did you make of the New York Democrat primary? Mamdani.
He's a communist. I think it's very bad for New York. I don't know that he's going to get in. It's inconceivable that but he's a communist, and he's a pure communist. I think he admits it, but I can't imagine it. But let's say this. If he does get in, I'm going to be president, and he's going to have to do the right thing, or they're not getting any money. He's got to do the right thing. It's shocking that I would have assumed that I used to say we will never have a socialist in this country. No, but we'll have a communist. I mean, he's a communist and going to be mayor of New York. So I was very surprised when I never heard of him.
This is President Trump, a New Yorker. Don, your reaction?
Well, look, I'm in agreement with him. I am shocked that the epicenter of capitalism in the largest democracy on the planet and the most powerful nation on the planet has elected a socialist in the Democratic primary. But this is, again, a part of the shift that is happening right now. Is this far left wing of the Democratic Party is pushing out moderates and centrist Democrats, and they're moving to Republicans. That is why President Trump won all the swing states. But the problem is that the Democratic leadership in many of these centers, like New York City, has been sitting on its butt because they haven't had to really do anything. They could take it for granted. But now the party's been hijacked by the left wing, and everyone's been caught flat-footed. I'm astonished at the lack of leadership in the real estate industry in New York City overall. I sounded the alarm when Bill de Blasio was running against Bill Thompson and Christine Quinn, saying that we needed to consolidate our support behind Thompson so he could win. Here, the Democratic Party never took Mamdani or anyone else seriously because they felt Andrew Cuomo was inevitable because of his success as governor for 3 terms and pro-business approach. Now they're scrambling. And look, I think there's going to be a robust general election.
Yeah, I think you're right. And the question now is can the business community coalesce around one formidable opponent to Zohran Mamdani so that businesses aren't ruined in the city. Real quick before you go, I do want to ask you about this affordability crisis that's happening in California. Demand is now collapsing in some of these residential neighborhoods. Price is down a little bit, but now inventory is piling up. And even on the commercial side, business owners are pushing back against the policies from the Democrats there. They're saying are pushing them out of the state of California. Your reaction, Don?
Yeah, look, California, and especially Southern California, is the most difficult place to do business in the United States. We were trying to build a $1.6 billion development in downtown LA and stuck with it during the COVID crisis, and yet we could get no support from the government. In fact, policies that were hurting businesses. But what's amazing to me is the reason why they're not as supply constrained right now isn't because they've added a single unit. It's because people are fleeing. They have given up and they're going to other places. And that's going to continue to happen. And even when you had an entire neighborhood burned down while the government was watching, nothing was done, and now people are leaving. So I think the challenge with Los Angeles and Southern California is that it's got to hit rock bottom before change takes place, like San Francisco. And I think Southern California is a ways off, so we're going to see more of an exodus out of California because the quality of life is diminished as well.
Don Peebles, it is always so great to speak to you about, well, one of my favorite topics, and that is real estate. Wow, what an incredible turn we're seeing across the country here. Sir, thank you so much for being here. I'm sure your phone's been ringing off the hook. We appreciate your time.
Thank you, Cheryl.
All right.
Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent says that Democrats are holding things up.
We are moving toward a vote today. And look, the 20 hours doesn't worry me because it's just the Democrats trying to obstruct this one big, beautiful bill. President Trump has incredible momentum from the border to Israel, Iran. Now we're going to bring it home on the tax bill, and then we'll do trade next week. It's just the Democrats trying to stop the president's momentum.
I think we're up to 25 hours now. And the president turning up the heat, warning that 68% of Americans will get a tax increase if the bill fails to pass, calling it perhaps the most important bill in American history. But the margin is razor thin, and the fiscal hawks are circling. J.D. Vance is working on the Hill right now. We're going to see if the MAGA agenda gets another major win or if Washington strikes back. We're looking at a Dow, Kenny, that's up 400 and change at the moment. You've got a different situation with the U.S. dollar and with treasuries, but the market is confident that this is a good thing and it will pass.
Well, the market's confident that it's going to pass, I think, right? And the Dow, because if you look at the S&P, I think the S&P is flat, isn't it? Or is the S&P down a little bit? It's a little bit negative. Yeah. But the Dow certainly is telling you that it thinks it's going to pass. I'd like to see that it pass and we move on. I'm afraid, though, it's going to hit some other snags.
Okay, and we're talking about this vote that's taking place right now. My understanding is they went back and forth with Murkowski, but she is on team pass this bill. They're allowed to lose 3 votes, and then J.D. Vance would cast the tiebreaker.
They just need to flip Murkowski. That's it, because then Vance becomes the tiebreaker. The big thing, I think, for Murkowski has been just, you know, Medicaid and the amount of cuts that will come to Medicaid. She doesn't think she can sell that to her people. She doesn't want to sell that to her constituents. You know, okay, but then other senators are going to say, well, if you did that, then I want this, and so on and so on. But if they found a compromise, I think that is the final piece.
And really some say the cuts to Medicaid aren't enough, Dagan, but yet you have Chuck Schumer saying to all these people, you're going to basically lose your coverage, people are going to die. This is, you know, a totally explosive situation.
Lisa Murkowski, what she has been able to extract for her state in giveaways is embarrassing. Like somebody said to me yesterday, you know, she's always flirted with being an independent and leaving the Republican Party. But why would you leave the Republican Party if they hand out gifts like this? Yeah. You want to listen?
I believe it passed. I just want to, okay, it did pass, so I didn't mean to interrupt you, but I just...
Do we want to listen to Vice President J.D. Vance?
Let us pray. Eternal, ever-blessed God, help our senators
Okay, we just
to
missed
walk.
J.D. Vance and a quick comment that it looks like he made there, but the final vote took place on the big, beautiful bill. It has passed.
So we were
carry on.
talking about to get Lisa
Murkowski,
Murkowski on board. I could go into the details of all of the giveaways that senator was able to extract, but it's embarrassing and it is lunchtime and I don't want to make you nauseated. It goes back to the House now. And it wasn't just she's upset about Medicaid. Nothing. The major changes to Medicaid didn't even happen.
Right.
They didn't change how much the federal government hands out dollar for dollar, $9 for every dollar that a state spends for the Obamacare Medicaid expansion. $9 for a healthy, adult, able-bodied dude or chick. $1.33 for every dollar for someone who's disabled. They didn't change that. Rick Scott tried to change it. I digress. But there are enough people in the House Freedom Caucus who are angry about how much money was spent, excess money was spent. It is well above the baseline. It is hundreds of billions of dollars above the baseline that the House handed them in their bill.
So what happens now, Dagan? It goes back to the House.
How do you square that?
How do you square it? Yeah.
They have to change it.
Right.
That's why I don't think it gets passed by July 4th.
Yeah, I don't think it does either. I think it's going to stall somewhere.
When I asked you about the markets, I also brought up treasuries and the dollar. And Taylor, I want to come to you on that because while the Dow might be confident about the passage of the bill and what's in it and that it's good for the country, we're seeing a different picture in yields and also in the dollar index. And I'm thinking to myself, part of that could have to do with Powell and the potential for not cutting rates in July. Maybe there was a small percentage chance that he would consider that. But part of it also has to do with confidence in general.
Yes, and I would also, Kenny, I always agree with you. You're one of the smartest in the room. But we hit a record on the S&P 500 yesterday. So the fact that we're only off about 12 points today, to me, isn't like a big signal that we're worried about this. It may take longer than July 4, but I think the market is actually really optimistic. Most of the notes I've read, and feel free to disagree with me, second half of the year is boom time for equities, for the economy, for all of the above. Wedbush, the latest out, saying big tech rallies 10% in the second half of this year alone because AI and the momentum of all of this. And that's not even really getting the nitty-gritty details of the big, beautiful bill. Jackie, let's talk about the 10-year. You're at a 427. That's low. Remember when we were like above 4.5 and we were all getting really nervous? Yeah. You have a 30-year that's at a 480, nowhere near 5%. So I agree that yields are up a little bit today, a couple basis points, but overall this has been a market that has really been taking this in stride. When you think about a 10-year or a 30-year trying to price in deficits and debt and this big, beautiful bill, and what does that mean? And I'm assuming that the good news is yields are calm and stable because we talk about scary charts from the Committee for a Responsible Federal Budget or scary charts from the CBO that say 7% deficits and Scott Bassett wanted 3%. But that's discounting the growth story that we've often so talked about on this program, where if you get 3.5% GDP, that means debt to GDP ratios go down. Deficit as a percent of GDP goes down, if, again, assuming that GDP grows. So I think the markets are trying to look at this and think about the growth story as well. Right. And then,
but the big thing that you said is the if. And that's the part that you can't touch and you can't feel. You can project it, you can hope for it, you can predict it.
Can I just add one thing that was added to this bill, and it's passed 51-50, so J.D. Vance was the tiebreaker, the vice president. The SNAP carve-out, so these are, this is
food stamps.
Food stamps. Thank you. I love how the British gentleman over here has to redneck speak for me. The SNAP carve-out, the food stamp carve-out, intended just for Lisa Murkowski, Alaska, that is coming together in the big, beautiful bill. This is from Paul Winfrey. Would literally reward all states who can get their payment error rates above 13% by delaying the work requirements. It literally encourages waste, fraud, and abuse. That's what they offered up to get Lisa Murkowski to vote for it. I'm assuming the no's were Rand Paul, Tillis, and then Susan Collins.
Yep.
And that's it.
I just want to get back to the growth story with you, Kenny, for a second. 3 to 3.5% GDP growth. It's possible, certainly under this formula.
Yep.
The tax cuts help stimulate that for people, for individuals, consumers, which are 2/3 of our economy, but also for businesses. But it's the part that you can't touch.
That's right. Right, and
Until it happens.
Right, it's the unknown at the moment. To your point, right? So I think it very well can happen. We've seen it. We saw what the Atlanta GDP is forecasting. So I'm very much in the camp that if the second half of the year turns out to be as good as everyone thinks it is, analysts and strategists, that we can certainly make that.
You know what hurts growth? Spending $1.2 trillion on interest every year.
Right, 100%, which is...
Get the rates down.
So it hasn't fully passed yet. It has not been signed into law. But this Senate bill, as was written, $5 trillion increase in the debt ceiling. That's why Rand Paul, the senator, did not vote for it. The Treasury Department, if it passes, will immediately borrow $1 trillion to replenish its cash account. On top of that, it has to refinance $7 trillion plus in debt in the next year.
Rolling over.
Yeah.
Right. So we're going to have $38 trillion in debt by September. And is the market going to digest that? Is the market going to step up? Because we're staring at, I'm being nice about this, but the 10-year yield, 4.25,
Yep.
it really hasn't budged. It should be lower. It's not. Because of the inflation risk and because of the recklessness of spending.
Right.
Because investors are sitting back going, I'm not going to, it's why Treasury Secretary Bessent yesterday admitted that they're not going to right-size the maturity schedule right now, extending the maturity schedule to the 10-year because he thinks the 10-year yield's too high by one standard deviation, so that's a full percentage point. But investors won't loan the federal government money because of the interest rate risk at 4.25.
Which means if they try to go and refinance, so much supply is going to come to the market. The investors, the buyers, are going to pull back, and that's going to cause those rates to go higher.
So they have to keep it at the short end. That's why Jay Powell is under pressure to lower short-term interest rates. My point is that we're on a razor's edge.
I agree.
And these Republicans are on a razor's edge of screwing the pooch. Because $5 trillion increase in the debt ceiling, and they cut spending, but not enough.
Nope.
And they spent a hell of a lot of money that didn't need to get spent.
But then we have Larry Kudlow come on our show, and he'll say, I don't love some of the spending that we've seen, but the growth will fix the spending. I'm not worried about it. That's just the devil's advocate argument.
Right.
Yeah. Mike Johnson in the House sounded very sobering and honest maybe 3 weeks ago when he sort of begged the Senate, don't make a lot of changes, because what we did in the House the first time was like as good as we could get. So that's where I think all of these ideas are going to come and hit him, later today or tomorrow or whenever the House decides to look at this is, does this have the appetite in the House? Or does Mike Johnson have room to continue to move her?
It does not.
This does not.
Right.
And that's
Which
could
is
be
why
the
I
issue.
don't think it makes it to the desk by July 4th.
I mean, that's Friday,
Right.
guys.
That's Friday.
That's Friday.
Right. And they're already starting. Somebody said it. I forget who it was. They were already starting to play that down, saying, "Well, that was a really hard and fast date, the middle of the month."
Right. And even Trump said, if it takes a little longer, it's okay.
okay.
But we just want to be in that ballpark.
Right.
But to me, it looks like the Senate version is so different than the House version that the House has to say, "We're rewriting it
Start
again."
again.
Right.
Yeah, it really is. They're not going to go for a lot of these provisions. There's just no way. Senate bill is so much bigger and is bigger than the House version. Can they meet halfway? I don't know. I don't know how many House members are prepared to do that.
I I'm sure some of the Republicans who voted on it or for it in the Senate don't even know what's in it.
It's 1,000 pages. And this is what I love. When it comes at least to the Democrats, they're always saying, oh, pass the 1,000-page bill and read it later. But we had to talk about it for 25 hours last night before anybody could start,
That was a
voting.
Nancy Pelosi quote when she said, we have to pass it first to understand what's in it. Are you kidding?
Don't get me wrong. These tax cuts needed to be made permanent.
Yeah.
Yes.
The Democrats, and the headline should be, every single Democrat in the Senate just voted to raise your taxes.
Yep.
Every single Democrat in the Senate just voted for the biggest tax hike in American history. That's what they stand for. They stand for crushing the working man and crushing the working woman. For what? Because they're anti-Trump. And that's the end of it.
And can I quantify that for you? The average tax increase would be anywhere from 7 to 8%. And I was making the point earlier this morning that while the rate of inflation has slowed, yes, and that's a good thing because prices don't just keep going higher, the price increases, many of them that we saw, are stuck there. The price of a cup of coffee went up and it really never came down. So people are struggling still to make ends meet. And that's why these tax cuts matter, because at the end of the day, it's about household budgeting. Your wages didn't go up enough to keep up with the amount that prices did go up. And so people cannot afford that. And basically, at the end of the day, if they don't get this tax break, you're going to pay out of pocket. Like, households don't have that kind of wiggle room.
Nope. Every single Democrat wants you to pay taxes on your tips. Every single Democrat wants you to pay taxes on your, don't want you to get a break on your Social Security income. Every single Democrat wants you to pay taxes on your overtime because they don't give a flying damn about the working man and woman. Or anybody,
and this is
quite frankly, anybody but them. They don't care about anybody but themselves. I'm going to shut up.
No.
But
I was just going to have some fun. And if you want to have some fun, Elon Musk is out over the weekend and is sort of coming back out and highlighting the debt and the deficit issue again. So he had been very quiet, and I think a lot of people agree you have to pass the bill. Don't let perfect get in the way of good. This is good enough, even though it's not perfect.
Right.
But he is absolutely continuing to make the case that the spending cuts aren't good enough, that the deficit numbers aren't good enough.
Yeah.
And so I think a lot of people look at that and also sometimes feel sympathy towards that point of view of, I voted for a little bit more. Therein lies the rub.
He's your Doge guy. So he's the one who, took the chainsaw out and tried to find places to trim the fat. So he looks at this and that's his view. And I'm not saying that that's not wrong, that it is wrong. It's not.
The tell about concern from investors about the long-term fiscal picture of the United States and inflation is your 30-year. So it's close, still pretty close to 5%, 4.8%. If investors thought inflation was going down to 2%, they'd be all over that yield, because that would be a 3% long-term real return. 3% for 30 years is doggone good. But they are not willing.
And Treasury.
And the very fact that the Treasury Department is not issuing new debt at that duration or at that maturity is evidence that there's just not demand out there for it.
And treasuries aren't taxed the same way equities are with capital gains. So really, your return is typically even a little bit higher than what you would expect it to be, with the risk that you'd have to take to be in the equity market, which people are buying up today.
When I say risk, the risk is that there's an event that those rates skyrocket. And then it gets away from you, you meaning the federal government, and then they can't, and it becomes the death spiral. And it's just part of the discussion right now.
It's a lot of doom and gloom.
Well, but
it's also reality.
We are paying out in interest every year more than we spend on every other budget item except Social Security.
That's more than disturbing.
Social Security. Interest.
Right. But
and that's a suck.
Again, I go back to Jenny Yellen had the opportunity to finance that at long-term rates at 1 3/4, 1.8% in 20 and 21 when rates were near zero. She could have refinanced the long-term debt at 30-year rates at that rate and chose not to.
How are you going to deal with the $9 trillion that's coming due this year?
We'll just turn it over. Oh, well, let me tell you that we're going to do it this way. We're going to turn it over short term because we have a stupid person at the Fed. If he would lower the rates, but I don't want to have to pay for 10 years debt at a higher rate. And then we're going to get somebody into the Fed who's going to be able to lower the rates. We should be at 1% or 2%.
And that's President Trump with me in my exclusive interview last week on the $9 trillion of debt that rolls over this year. I am talking this morning with the Treasury Secretary, Scott Bessent. And Secretary, I want to get your thoughts on that in terms of this $9 trillion in debt that is coming due this year. Not to mention the debt and deficits that many lawmakers have mentioned in the big, beautiful bill. What are the plans for the $9 trillion?
Maria, we've seen a great demand from both domestic and overseas investors for U.S. debt. We will make our decision on how to term the debt out over the next couple of months. But I can tell you right now, the short-term rates, 2-year rates are telling us that the overnight rate is too high, and we're gonna take that into account. But our debt management process is very regular, very methodical. But we are going to take these contingencies into account.
And I know that you have watched the 10-year. It has broken below 4.3%, now sitting at 4.26%. And, of course, we are awfully close to the date that the government runs out of money, Mr. Secretary. And, of course, in the big, beautiful bill is that point to raise the debt ceiling by $5 trillion. Secretary, when is the X date? Is it August of this year?
Well, Maria, at 7:45, we won't have to worry about the X date anymore. This should get us well into 2027, and we'll go from there. But I can tell you that I had lots of meetings with the Freedom Caucus and lots of the Senate so-called deficit hawks too. And look, Maria, I'm a deficit hawk. President Trump's a deficit hawk. We are going to fix this fiscal problem and get it under control. That should bring down interest rates. That signal. But these Freedom Caucus members, they've shifted the center of gravity and the conversation, just like the deficit hawks in the Senate have, just as President Trump has. So we are laser focused on bringing this deficit down.
Yeah, and I know that the president has been prodding Jay Powell to cut interest rates. Do you believe that if he cuts rates on the short end, then long-term rates would also get impacted by that?
I think that inflation expectations should be coming down. Inflation expectations are very well anchored. The dog that didn't bark was inflation due to tariffs. I call it tariff derangement syndrome. And the Federal Reserve, it's a committee. The committee seems to be a little off here in their judgment. And I think that as we see inflation coming down, just based on previous Fed models, that rates will be lower.
Now, Mr. Secretary, this morning, Bill Pulte from the FHFA is demanding that Jay Powell resign immediately because of this $2.5 billion project on a new Fed headquarters. Do you want to see Jay Powell resign?
Look, I think that we have been trying to get waste, fraud, and abuse out of the system. So that is it healthy for the Fed to get their spending under control just like everybody else in this time of belt tightening and right sizing the federal government? Sure.
So you want to see him resign?
I want to see the Fed right size their budget.
I see. I mean, look, Secretary, you've got an incredible job, the leading person in terms of the economy in the world, the U.S. Treasury Secretary, and yet your name was on a list, apparently, for the president considering you to run the Federal Reserve. Is that a job you would like?
We have a lot of great candidates for the Federal Reserve. I think I have the best job in Washington. I get to interact with the president. The cabinet that he's chosen is fantastic, and being part of that cabinet is the dream of a lifetime for me. But I will go where the president thinks that I am best suited.
Has he asked you to potentially take on that role?
Maria, I'm not going to reveal private conversations, but I'll tell you, there are a lot of good, strong candidates, and we get to hopefully fill 2 seats next year.
That's right, yes. And of course, the president just nominated Mickey Bowman for the vice chairman, and she is already coming up with new ideas to ease back on regulations for the major banks. I want to talk to you about deregulation. That's another major point of the president's agenda. And a lot of people talk about what this big, beautiful bill is going to yield in terms of growth, but they're not focused on the growth that may end up coming up and end up helping to pay for it. What's your take on deregulation and what that will mean for economic growth in the second half of the year and 2026?
So, Maria, as I said earlier, the 3 legs to the stool, trade, taxes, and deregulation. Trade and taxes have been out front because those are negotiations or legislative maneuvers. The deregulation is very important, and in President Trump's first term, the reason we got the substantial non-inflationary growth was because we opened up the supply side via deregulation. And as you just said, on the financial side, the Vice Chair Bowman at the Fed, in charge of the financial regulation, is smartly and safely working on ways to unleash the regulated banking system, including small banks, which are in danger of being wiped out. And I think for Main Street to do well, we need for small banks to do well. So we are focused on that. We are focused on permitting. President Trump wants to make the U.S. an AI superpower. And we have cheap energy. We have the tech know-how more than any other country in the world, but we haven't been able to get those permitted. So we are determined, permitting, deregulation, and that will bring costs down for American families.
So do you think the permitting comes out of the big, beautiful bill? Will we see the permitting actually codified?
A lot of the permitting is either via executive orders or it's via the departments. So President Trump has been laser focused on this. As a builder himself, he understands the process and is very good at expediting these things. So, if we are going to be an energy superpower, if we are going to achieve AI dominance, if we are going to build pipelines, then this permitting crisis has to be solved. If we are going to get more lending back into the regulated banking system, then we need to fix this overregulation that came out of the GFC in the financial services industry.
And what would be an appropriate growth level that we should expect for the second half or for 2026 economic growth?
I think we could see growth in excess of 3%. We've got this great AI productivity boom. We couple that with the deregulation, these trade deals. We've got money coming in from overseas in terms of foreign direct investment in the trillions. Once the bill passes at 7:45 today, business will have great certainty, as we talked earlier, about the full expensing. So I would expect in the third, fourth quarter, you are going to see factory announcements like we haven't seen. That until this bill was passed, American businesses could not be 100% sure that if they broke ground, they would get the full expensing. This morning, they will have that certainty, and I think we could see a real acceleration from here.
And I know that you've also got the crypto legislation expected that the president will sign that next week. But, you know, Secretary, Hakeem Jeffries is still talking. I don't know. I mean, is this a stall tactic? He's been talking for more than an hour.
Of course it is, but again, what are they in favor of? We know what they're against. They're against Main Street. They're against energy dominance. They're against working Americans. They're for inflation. They're for more government spending. So let him tell us what he's in favor of.
Yeah. Secretary, this has been an illuminating conversation, and we so appreciate your time this morning, sir. Thank you.
Good to see you, Maria. It's an important day.
And to you. Okay, happy 4th of July, Secretary Scott Bessent. How are you going to deal with the $9 trillion that's coming due this year?
We'll just turn it over. Oh, well, let me tell you that we're going to do it this way. We're going to turn it over short term because we have a stupid person at the Fed. If he would lower the rates, but I don't want to have to pay for 10 years debt at a higher rate. And then we're going to get somebody into the Fed who's going to be able to lower the rates. We should be at 1% or 2%.
And that's President Trump with me in my exclusive interview last week on the $9 trillion of debt that rolls over this year. I am talking this morning with the Treasury Secretary, Scott Bessent. And Secretary, I want to get your thoughts on that in terms of this $9 trillion in debt that is coming due this year. Not to mention the debt and deficits that many lawmakers have mentioned in the big, beautiful bill. What are the plans for the $9 trillion?
Maria, we've seen a great demand from both domestic and overseas investors for U.S. debt. We will make our decision on how to term the debt out over the next couple of months. But I can tell you right now, the short-term rates, 2-year rates are telling us that the overnight rate is too high, and we're gonna take that into account. But you know, our debt management process is very regular, very methodical. But you know, we are going to take these contingencies into account.
And I know that you have watched the 10-year. It has broken below 4.3%, now sitting at 4.26%. And, of course, we are awfully close to the date that the government runs out of money, Mr. Secretary. And, of course, in the big, beautiful bill is that point to raise the debt ceiling by $5 trillion. Secretary, when is the X date? Is it August of this year?
Well, Maria, at 7:45, we won't have to worry about the X date anymore. This should get us well into 2027, and you know we'll go from there. But I can tell you that I had lots of meetings with the Freedom Caucus and lots of the Senate. So-called deficit hawks too. And look, Maria, I'm a deficit hawk. President Trump's a deficit hawk. We are going to fix this fiscal problem and get it under control. That should bring down interest rates. That signal. But these Freedom Caucus members, they've shifted the center of gravity and the conversation, just like the deficit hawks in the Senate have, just as President Trump has. So you know, we are laser focused on bringing this deficit down.
Yeah, and I know that the president has been prodding Jay Powell to cut interest rates. Do you believe that if he cuts rates on the short end, then long-term rates would also get impacted by that?
I think that inflation expectations should be coming down. Inflation expectations are very well anchored. The dog that didn't bark was inflation due to tariffs. You know, I call it tariff derangement syndrome. And the Federal Reserve, it's a committee. The committee seems to be a little off here in their judgment. And I think that you know, as we see inflation coming down, just based on previous Fed models, that rates will be lower.
Now, Mr. Secretary, this morning, Bill Pulte from the FHFA is demanding that Jay Powell resign immediately because of this $2.5 billion project on a new Fed headquarters. Do you want to see Jay Powell resign?
Look, I think that we have been trying to get waste, fraud, and abuse out of the system. So
that is it healthy for the Fed to get their spending under control just like everybody else in this time of belt tightening and right sizing the federal government? Sure.
So you want to see him resign?
I want to see the Fed right size their budget.
I see. I mean, look, Secretary, you've got an incredible job, the leading person in terms of the economy in the world, the U.S. Treasury Secretary, and yet your name was on a list, apparently, for the president considering you to run the Federal Reserve. Is that a job you would like?
We have a lot of great candidates for the Federal Reserve. I think I have the best job in Washington. I get to interact with the president. The cabinet that he's chosen is fantastic, and being part of that cabinet is the dream of a lifetime for me. But I will go where the president thinks that I am best suited.
Has he asked you to potentially take on that role?
Maria, I'm not going to reveal private conversations, but I'll tell you, there are a lot of good, strong candidates, and we get to hopefully fill 2 seats next year.
That's right, yes. And of course, the president just nominated Mickey Bowman for the vice chairman, and she is already coming up with new ideas to ease back on regulations for the major banks. I want to talk to you about deregulation. That's another major point of the president's agenda. And a lot of people talk about what this big, beautiful bill is going to yield in terms of growth, but they're not focused on the growth that may end up coming up and end up helping to pay for it. What's your take on deregulation and what that will mean for economic growth in the second half of the year and 2026?
So, Maria, as I said earlier, the 3 legs to the stool, trade, taxes, and deregulation. Trade and taxes have been out front because those are negotiations or legislative maneuvers. The deregulation is very important, and in President Trump's first term, the reason we got the substantial non-inflationary growth was because we opened up the supply side via deregulation. And as you just said, on the financial side, the Vice Chair Bowman at the Fed, in charge of the financial regulation, is smartly and safely working on ways to unleash the regulated banking system, including small banks, which are in danger of being wiped out. And I think for Main Street to do well, we need for small banks to do well. So we are focused on that. We are focused on permitting. President Trump wants to make the U.S. an AI superpower. And we have cheap energy. We have the tech know-how more than any other country in the world, but we haven't been able to get those permitted. So we are determined, permitting, deregulation, and that will bring costs down for American families.
So do you think the permitting comes out of the big, beautiful bill? Will we see the permitting actually codified?
A lot of the permitting is either via executive orders or it's via the departments. So President Trump has been laser focused on this. As a builder himself, he understands the process and is very good at expediting these things. So, if we are going to be an energy superpower, if we are going to achieve AI dominance, if we are going to build pipelines, then this permitting crisis has to be solved. If we are going to get more lending back into the regulated banking system, then we need to fix this overregulation that came out of the GFC in the financial services industry.
And what would be an appropriate growth level that we should expect for the second half or for 2026?
Yeah,
economic growth.
I think we could see growth in excess of 3%. We've got this great AI productivity boom. We couple that with the deregulation, these trade deals. We've got money coming in from overseas in terms of foreign direct investment in the trillions. Once the bill passes at 7:45 today, business will have great certainty, as we talked earlier, about the full expensing. So I would expect in the third, fourth quarter, you are going to see factory announcements like we haven't seen.
Okay.
until this bill was passed, American businesses could not be 100% sure that if they broke ground, they would get the full expensing.
Yeah.
This morning, they will have that certainty, and I think we could see a real acceleration from here.
And I know that you've also got the crypto legislation expected, that the president will sign that next week. But, you know, Secretary, Hakeem Jeffries is still talking. I don't know. I mean, is this a stall tactic? He's been talking for more than an hour.
Of course it is, but again, what are they in favor of? We know what they're against. They're against Main Street. They're against energy dominance. They're against working Americans. They're for inflation. They're for more government spending. So let him tell us what he's in favor of.
Yeah. Secretary, this has been an illuminating conversation, and we so appreciate your time this morning, sir. Thank you.
Good to see you, Maria. It's an important day.
And to you. Okay, happy 4th of July, Secretary Scott Bessent.
The 4th of July deadline is just days away, and the House is reopening debate on the big, beautiful bill right now, but it is no layup for Speaker Mike Johnson.
This is no longer just a House bill. It's not a Senate bill. It's the bill of the people, of the hardworking American people, and we are going to deliver it. We got a clear mandate from the people in November to do this. President Trump ran on a clear set of priorities and promises, and we did as well, and this is the vehicle to deliver it. We're almost there at that finish line.
Allow me to get in the weeds without losing my mind, because I have a long list of things that I absolutely despise.
We'd expect nothing less.
About what was inserted over in the Senate to placate the likes of Lisa Murkowski.
Oh, boy.
It's not just Lisa Murkowski, it was also the lobbyist for the climate con artist.
Amen.
Yes.
I'm with you.
Right? Ugly. Yeah. Ugly.
Last minute insertion. Ugly.
A paragraph.
That's how it works.
It added $100 billion. Well, it's got a lot of Republicans in the House very angry. Right now, so about 15 minutes from now, that's based on Chad Pergram's timing, the House is expected to vote on the rule. And the House must first adopt the rule in order to then consider the full bill. And if the rule fails, the House is then blocked from considering the entire one big beautiful bill or putting it up for a full vote. As of this morning, there were more than, this is based on Chad's reporting and my own reporting, there were more than 12, so more than a dozen Republican no's on the rule, on the test vote, just to get to the big, beautiful bill and put it on the floor. And so if this vote goes down, according to Chad, Republicans cannot even bring this bill to the floor. So this is what we're waiting for right now. People are, conservatives are PO'd about what happened over in the Senate. How do you see it?
I mean, look, the House delivered a clean bill without this exemptions for solar and wind subsidies. The first version of the Senate bill actually changed placed in service to under construction, which extended them. Then the next version got back to where we should have been. And then at the last minute, you mentioned, and I know this is getting in the weeds for everyone, I'd encourage you to check out Alex Epstein's Energy Talking Points. He does a great job of articulating this. But there's one paragraph insertion that basically creates 12-month window to begin construction. And if they do that, it's as little as 5% expenditures. It opens up these tax credits and subsidies for the next decade, which could be hundreds of billions, if not $1 trillion.
But my question is, can Republicans reject this? Can they find a compromise between the House and the Senate bill? They're way apart. Is there a compromise somewhere in there? And do you really think Republicans are going to reject what is the biggest piece of President Trump's agenda right now? I just don't see that happening. Well, but I don't know how we get there.
It is not it doesn't have to, I don't mean to hog the floor. Jump in here. Yeah. But it doesn't have to be, it's not an all or nothing. It is we're going to make changes to it and send it back to the Senate. Right. It is not adhering to the July 4th deadline, obviously. No. But that is the central question. The Republicans who are fiscally conservative, as they damn well should be, given the $38 trillion in debt and the $1.2 trillion that we're paying in interest on the national debt just right now annually. They're trying to figure out, and this is based on a source of mine, what to ask for exactly. Do they go back to demanding that some of the House policies, like, reducing the payment from the federal government to states that give Medicaid to illegal aliens, that got taken out of the Senate bill. Do they go back to demanding that, or demanding what was put back in for the Green New Deal? So what do they want out of this? What do they ask for? Are they just going to get some sort of like fiscal commission?
Well, you guys correct me if I'm wrong. This July 4 was self-imposed, and I like that because it gives us time to get money. What's that famous Federal Reserve saying? The long and variable lags of monetary policy. It takes time for money and fiscal policies to work its way through the system for midterm. So I understand the urgency, especially wanting to combat all the tariff news, get this passed. That said, if you need a few more days or a week or whatever to figure out this bill, I'm actually okay with that if it helps solve some of these problems. I don't need Friday 9 a.m. That urgency. I understand it. There's some good news and some bad news from an economic front that I think explains some of the urgency.
Well, that did not take long. President Trump threatening to walk away from trade talks with Canada, and then boom, shakalaka. Ottawa, blink. Canada has now scrapped its controversial digital services tax, a cash grab that would have shaken down American technology giants with millions of dollars in penalties. The president says the time for pleasantries is over.
Canada is a very tough country to deal with, I will say that. And I love Canada.
You have USMCA in place.
I know, but
you'll have to deal with it.
USMCA is no good if they cheat.
What does that mean?
Well, there's been things going on that we don't like, and things going on where they took advantage. And hopefully we'll be fine with Canada. I love Canada. Frankly, Canada should be the 51st state.
Wall Street liking what it sees from the White House. Stocks jumping to new highs. The S&P and NASDAQ on pace for the second straight day of record closes. So on Friday, when you read the headline about the spat with Canada, about the digital services tax, I actually...
Did you roll your eyes at me, Dagan?
No. Oh, golly, no.
Dagan never does that.
But after the fact, I was very unmoved by what Canada was doing, because I knew instinctively we could count in hours how long it would take for them to reverse course.
Yeah, blink and you miss it. Right. They blinked and they missed it. And this is interesting. I'm actually curious if how the EU's thinking about this as well, because they've been targeting our big tech companies as well as part of their sort of tariff retaliation strategy. So look, Dagan, I think it's key that they have rolled that back. I think that's smart for negotiations. It allows us to really come forward with full faith. There's no reason why how do I say this? We are the most innovative entrepreneurship economy. The fact that Canada gets to benefit from our big tech companies doesn't mean they get to do a 3% tax. If they want to do that, they should invent some of the cool companies on their own. But guess what? They're not. We are. We're inventing these awesome tech companies that everyone else gets to benefit from. And also quickly, with these markets, Dagan, I will say, pretty astonishing. I think I read a note. We're up 28% from the April 7, April 8 bottom. That's incredible. And June really never sees record highs. You get them towards the latter. You get some January and a lot December in the back half. So the fact that you're starting to seem to, I think this market's really optimistic about some of these other trade deals coming down.
I think, and also based on the fact that so many people have missed this bounce in this second quarter and even this month alone, they've spent so much time navel gazing at the Fed, saying, oh, what's the Fed going to do? Forget about it. Get in there, make your money work. And some people have done that, and they've done very, very well. But there's still a ton of money on the sidelines that needs to go to work. And as for the trade deals, I always thought Canadians were supposed to be the nicest people in the world. But apparently not when it comes to dealing. But they caved today, and that's the right decision.
Who told you that?
Big Papa took out his stick. Okay. We knew this was going to happen on Friday. Sometimes the children like to push back a little and test the boundaries and see what they could get away with. But I knew they were not getting away with this.
Nah.
Nobody at this table thought they were going to get away with it. And sure enough, they dropped it. President Trump, in his amazing interview with Maria Bartiromo, had a lot of sound bites, including ones on Canada. At one point, he said, Canada relies entirely on the United States. We don't rely on Canada. And he went on to give examples of situations where they're charging our farmers substantial amounts to bring goods into the country. And so at the end of the day, I don't even know what they were thinking to impose this tax while a negotiation was happening. I guess they just wanted to see if they could get away with it, and it didn't fly. But they are going to have to work out these issues because it's an important trading relationship for us, for sure. I think the president recognizes that. But he's made it clear nobody's walking all over us anymore. And why I'm really shocked is because he has so much wind at his back right now, whether it was NATO, whether it was the operation in the Middle East and taking out Iran's nuclear facility, whether it's the economy, whether it's the big, beautiful bill, which looks like it's on its way. This is not the time to mess with him.
I just want to say and answer the question about are Canadians nice? Yes, they are. I am married to one. I know for sure that they're nice. And maybe that's the problem. You know, they backed up like that. But mostly because our economy is 15 times the size of their economy. We dominate them in almost every way. You know, everything from like culturally, you know, the music they're listening to, the TV shows they're watching. So it's no surprise here that Canada had to back down. And hopefully the EU does the same thing. But I just want to say, here's the deal. Here's the bottom line here. 78% of the goods that Canada produces get sold into the U.S. We are their audience, their end market for so much of what they make. Whether it's oil or autos, they need us more than we need them.
We need everybody to be buyers of our treasuries, though. And there's one thing, and Secretary of the Treasury, Scott Bessent, gave an interview this morning, and he was talking about, and I know, well, we all watched it, we all saw it. Secretary Bessent thinks that the 10-year yield is too high at the moment, and he's not going to increase issuance at the long end at these levels. This is critically important because yields and what people pay to borrow and what the United States pays to borrow directly impacts the valuation on stocks. And the Treasury still has to roll over in the next year 1/3 of its debt. And the vast majority of that, or most of it, is on the short end. And so this is something that we're going to have to watch over the next year. And Secretary Bessent, he was talking about it even before he was sworn in, about right-sizing the maturity schedule. But even now, he's still saying that the 10-year rate is still too high. However, I will note that Stephanie Pomboy writes today that despite our stunning evisceration of Iran's nuclear ambitions and the president brokering of a redoubled commitment by NATO, the dollar and the U.S. Treasury have received, quote, zero ostensible benefit from that.
Yeah,
so they should
not a
have
lot of love.
Right, they should have gotten more than that. And
Absolutely.
so it shows the pressure that the dollar and our debt could be feeling.
I read an interesting note, Dagan. I did this for you because we've talked about, when you talk about the dollar and treasuries, that whole, remember in April, American exceptionalism is over, sell America, go abroad. One note I read this morning said there has certainly been an allocation to international equities, but that's because there's such a big decline in global benchmarks for U.S., given how much would come down, that's natural. But the conclusion was we do not find any evidence to support the narrative that foreign investors have been allocating away from U.S. stocks, more than just reallocating normally as they have to their benchmark. So I love Scott Bessent. I think he's obviously one of the smartest people in the room. He's also out there saying that, you know what, we're the only country in the world where our 10-year yield is lower now than it was in January. Everyone else, their 10-year yield is higher than where it was a few months ago. So certainly that's been something on his mind.
It's interesting. And talking of Scott Bessent, have you noticed how he's kind of trying to follow up behind the president? The president says, we're going to get all these trade deals done within the next 2, 3, 4 weeks. Very good. They're all going to come to the table. And Scott Bessent is like, well, Yeah, maybe. I think we'll get the ball rolling in many cases, but I don't think we're going to get an actual deal done and signed within that time frame. But it would be interesting, just to get back to these trade deals, is that within the next 2 to 3 weeks, if we could get 10 to 12 countries, if we could get India, who's had a team negotiating at the White House for a while, if we could get a major one under our belt or more, that would be excellent. China's still hanging out there. We have somewhat of a truce, I think, right now, which is fine, because that's going to take some time. But we need that, and I think Scott Bessent is interesting. He's like, you know, I'd love for it to happen the way the president wants to happen, but hey, it may not. But we'll see.
But this also goes to why the next Federal Reserve chairman is so important.
Yes.
Because so much of the debt is on the short end, and that's why it's so critical that one reason to cut rates here. So the next Fed chief, the open seats and comes up in January 2026. So they're going to put the...
See you later.
That's not that far off.
I know, have the
couple months.
14-year seat, have that individual looming over.
Yes.
JJ.
Do we need to talk about how excited you were that you spilled your water? We were so excited about the new Fed chair and treasuries.
I spilled an entire cup of water. I thought I handled it really well.
You did. You didn't skip a beat. It was a flood, and you just carried it.
Yeah, I built a dam with my papers like this. You couldn't see me. Taylor was talking.
On the
I built a dam so it didn't get on my lap, and I just was doing that like that. But everything is, all the ink is running all over the place. But
you want to do something fun?
At least it was water.
Yeah. Joining me right now is the former Speaker of the House, Georgia Congressman and Fox News contributor Newt Gingrich, back with us. Mr. Speaker, always a pleasure. Great to see you, Newt. Your reaction?
Well, look, I mean, I think that Majority Leader Thune did an amazing job to get the Senate to act that quickly. He got down to the wire and needed the vice president to break the tie, but they got the bill through. That was an enormous achievement, and Majority Leader Thune deserves an awful lot of credit for inch by inch listening to his members, modifying the bill. And remember, for everybody who talks about no kings and about President Trump being too great a leader in terms of breaking out of the rules, this is the constitutional process. The 100 members of the Senate representing the states have to pass a bill. The 435 members of the House representing individual districts has to pass a bill. The president can't sign anything if they don't get this bill through. So the system's working. It's painful. It's hard. It's exactly what the Founding Fathers wanted. Now, Speaker Johnson has, I think, a very simple message that he's got to deliver to those Republicans who are thinking about voting no. A no vote is a vote for the largest tax increase in American history. I would challenge any House Republican. Explain to me, if the Senate bill got through by a tie vote with the vice president breaking the tie, what is it you think you're going to do to get the bill to be better and get it through the Senate? And the answer is nothing. So this is it. You can either be for the biggest tax increase in history, you can be for weakening our control on the border, you can be for allowing illegal immigrants to get tax-paid money, allowing adults who refuse to work to get tax-paid money. And remember, the Democrat comments on Medicaid are virtually all lies. There are no children who are affected by this. There are no families that are affected by this. This goes after people who are either illegal immigrants, committing fraud, or refusing to go to work. Now, overwhelmingly, the American people think that that's legitimate. So as the debate goes on, my hope is that the House Republicans will decide in the end that this is a big step. Remember, governing is a motion picture. It's not a Polaroid snapshot. After this bill, there are going to be more bills. There are going to be more opportunities. And it's important for the president's momentum that this pass, that he get it signed, and then they can turn to the next big achievement.
Yeah, and there will be another reconciliation opportunity later in the year to get more spending cuts and other priorities through. But you write out exactly what it means to the average family out there in your most recent piece, Newt, and it's really important to point this out because those people may very well hold those congressmen accountable. come the midterm elections. You write the average family of 4 would have paid an extra $1,700 in taxes, about 9 weeks worth of groceries, if they vote no. Killing the bill would have cut the child tax credit. And you also talk about small business. 26 million small businesses would have seen their taxes increase to 43%. These are huge impacts, and that affects growth overall in the broader economy, and it affects, obviously, the fate of families across the country.
You know, you can understand why the Democrats would vote no, because if they could stop this bill,
no, I still can't understand
it'll crush the economy.
Yeah, exactly.
Well,
I mean,
look,
they
it'll
want,
crush
I
the
guess
economy,
they want that going
and the Republicans
into the
will
midterms.
lose.
Exactly.
That's exactly
so it's all
right.
political.
Well, I think, look, it's a great risk the Democrats are taking, because if they become the party, additionally the party of Mamdani, if they become the party now of huge tax increases, that's going to be a pretty big burden to carry. You might think of it as an elephant on their back as they go into the election next year.
You know, President Trump has shown such practicality when it comes to a number of issues, not just about taxes and the border, but also about China. And the DOJ announced 2 Chinese nationals were arrested yesterday for allegedly spying on and collecting intelligence from U.S. Navy bases. They tried to recruit other military members to serve China's foreign intelligence. This is just a story that never quits. And I spoke with the president about the China threat and how he deals with it on Sunday Morning Futures. I want to get your take on how he responds here. Watch this.
We had a deal with China where it was 145% tariffs. And I will tell you, everything stopped in China.
It seems like you go so far with China, but you don't sort of use the leverage that you can use. I mean, look.
If I ever had to use it, I'd use it. But when there's no reason to use it, that's good too.
Well, we did just arrest 3 or 4 Chinese nationals who tried to bring a pathogen into the country that gets people sick and destroys food supply. We've got hacking.
You don't know where that came from, though. I mean, did that come from the country, or is that 3 wackos that happened to carry something? You know, you just don't.
Well, there was one that he signed that he would be, one of them signed a paper saying that he would value Mao Zedong's value system. So there was that. And then they hack into our telecom system. They've been stealing intellectual property. Fentanyl, COVID. I mean, you know, all of this stuff. So how do you negotiate with obviously a bad actor and trust them on economics?
You don't think we do that to them? We do.
So
we do a lot of things.
That's the way the world works?
It's the way the world works. No, it's a nasty world.
And then you just do a trade deal?
We do. Well, we made a lot of money with this trade deal. You know, I do a trade deal if it works. We made a lot of money with the trade deal.
You think that China is going to stop bullying companies to give them information in terms of in exchange for getting those rare earth minerals now?
Companies shouldn't put themselves in that position. You know, they really shouldn't. Now, I will say this. China right now needs those companies much more than they needed them 2 years ago.
So, Newt, I want to get your reaction here because obviously people were waiting on a trade deal with China. The July 9th tariff pause ends next week. With most nations, the China pause will end in August. What are your expectations in terms of all these trade deals? That will be the next big issue that the markets focus on, certainly, after the big bill passes the House this week.
Look, I always recommend to people to read Trump's first big bestseller, The Art of the Deal, because it tells you a lot about Trump. He's made tons of deals in his career. He's gotten to be very successful at it. And he's pretty confident that most days he can out-negotiate other people. My hunch is, and we've never talked about it this directly, but my hunch is that he has a very clear-cut yardstick. Is America better off? Does America get more jobs? Is there more investment in America? If the answer is yes, it's a good deal and he'll take it. If the answer is no, he's not going to take the deal, as he just proved to the Canadians. Trump understands better than any American president we're the biggest economy. Countries need access to us far more than we need access to them, and that gives him the leverage as a deal maker to consistently pressure other countries into giving America a better deal than they got in the last 30 years. And it's beginning to really work.
Do you think that voters will hold the Democrats accountable for their lack of putting America first, Newt? I mean, you've got the midterms coming up in 26. How do you see things happening going into that?
Well, the best analyst I know is a guy named Seth Keshel, who studies registration by county and state. Just issued a report 2 days ago that in every single county in Pennsylvania, Republicans have gained ground. Every single county. And so Keshel thinks we're probably going to keep the House and could keep the House by a big margin. The Democrats have got radicalism like Mamdani and AOC, and the Democrats have a history now of voting for tax increases, and the Democrats have to carry the burden of the Biden record. If the Republicans campaign strategically, they will have an astonishingly good year next year, and will be much like Franklin Roosevelt in 1934. It will consolidate the Trump majority and give the president 2 more years to continue making very aggressive reforms in what is now a 90-year-old system that's frankly corrupt and bureaucratic and incompetent and badly needs overhaul.
All right, we will leave it there. Great analysis as always. Great to see you, New. Thank you.
Good to see you.